Okay, let me get everything set up here. Come on, there we go. Okay. Hey, welcome to our genetics unit here. With genetics, we are going to take some of those same themes that we were talking about with DNA, and then take them to the next level with that. All right, DNA. We spent a lot of time talking about the um, kind of the more of the specifics on exactly how those pieces of information get passed on. Genetics, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how do those pieces of information get expressed. All right, so yes, we know we have this blueprint for life. Now, how exactly does it get passed out and get expressed versus just the details of how it works there? So, introduction to genetics here. So I like to point out kind of, we think that, hey, we've, known the answers for a long time about a lot of things, but until 1850, we really didn't understand how genetics works. And until one could argue that we're still definitely figuring out today, to this day, how exactly this whole thing happens. Before 1850, though, there was this blending theory of inheritance. And so the belief was that the traits of the parents are blended together to form the offspring. So one tall parent and one short parent would produce offspring of a medium height, so would fit in there. In my family, that works. My dad's the tallest, my mom's the shortest, my sister and I are right in between the two. However, that does not explain a lot of different genes, okay, or not necessarily genes, but traits, because at this time they didn't know the word gene, they didn't have a use for it. So, for example, two brown-eyed parents can have a blue-eyed child. How do you explain that? Essentially, they couldn't explain the idea of a recessive trait. Enter Mr. Mendel, old Gregor. Like I said, 1850s, he was doing his work. He's known as the father of genetics. It's actually a play on words because he was a Austrian monk. So his title in the church was Father Mendel. So he was the father of genetics after that, which is kind of a clever little play on words. But he's kind of the first. He starts our timeline off with his discoveries and his experiments there. So he really discovered how traits were inherited. Two words to point out here: genetics, the study of heredity. So he never used the word gene. All right, that term genetics came later. He talked about factors of inheritance and different things. Remember, this is before, they don't understand DNA. They don't. It's just we're pretty rudimentary at this point. And then heredity is the passing of traits from offspring. So what exactly did Mendel do? All right, so here's his brief bio here. 1820 to 1884 is where he lived. He's an Austrian monk. All right, so he was devoted to the church and had a lot of downtime living in the monastery. And what did you do with downtime in the 1850s? Is that you did a lot of math, science, data, those kind of things. He was a curious dude. He would do thousands of different pollinations and collect all these different data points. And it's important because had he not been very meticulous in his record keeping, then a lot of his findings wouldn't have been that important. Okay, one person notices something that doesn't really mean a lot, but if one person studies 29,000 pea plants over the course of 7 years, that is taken into a little larger consideration. He didn't get a lot of, there's a YouTube video there if you want to check it out. He didn't get a lot of credit while he was still alive. He got some. Actually, I think it's kind of funny. I read a book about him. So he was kind of a jerk. Like he was just kind of aloof and didn't really socialize with people and, kind of voice his opinions a lot. So when he died, the church actually burned all of his stuff. And so most of his notebooks and all these different kind of things we don't have anymore because the church burned them because he wasn't well liked among his peers there. So once again, video there if you want to check it out today. His two fundamental principles that he had there is this idea of the principle of segregation. That is, the factors of inheritance, genes, are normally paired up, but they get separated or segregated in the formation of gametes. So the idea that you have 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 chromosomes from dad, and your egg and sperm cells have half that number. Okay, so that's what this is, what he's credited for here. So meiosis, essentially. All right, so this idea that you have two genes for every trait, but when making reproductive cells, you're just going to pass on one of those two genes. All right, we take that for granted now that we've always known that, but it was Mendel that put two and two together there. And then the second one is that each factor's distribution, remember, they don't know he doesn't have the word gene or anything. So each gene's distribution in the gametes is not related to the distribution of any other factor. Okay, so that you can inherit things at random. It's not like, oh, your eye color is linked to your tooth structure or those kind of things. This is kind of true because we do know now that our genes are on chromosomes. So if they're located right next to each other on a chromosome, there's more likely that those two are going to be passed along as a pair, and less likely that crossing over is going to happen. But once again, fairly accurate to this day, but we know a little bit more about those things now. All right, so here, like I said, here's a look at just chromosome and its genes, that kind of thing. So he did a study on pea plants. The reason why pea plants are a good genetic study is because they, one, they don't have a lot of feelings, so you can manipulate them and force them to breed and do those different kind of things without too much pushback. They also complete their life cycle very quickly. So, if you're doing a human genetics experiment, you gotta think like if someone's gonna have a baby and then maybe 18 years later you can start the next generation, but that's a lot of time versus pea plants are, every season. And then the last one there is, sorry, two that I haven't skipped. They have a lot of traits that are either or. So he saw they had green or yellow pods. They had round or wrinkled seeds. They had purple or white flowers. So they didn't have quite the blend of traits. Humans, we have actually a lot of traits that are not simple either or traits. Think about eye color, hair color, height. There's a lot of like, oh, there's like, 6 or 7 different options in there. So peas don't have that. And then lastly, peas can be self-fertilized. So that means that you can sexually reproduce with themselves as a plant. They can take the pollen and cross it within the same species there. So you can know exactly what the genes are. All right. He had some I don't know if we need to spend a lot of time on this. A couple terms to take away. He came up with the idea of purebred and hybrid. All right, so purebred meaning that both of their gene pairs would be the same, and hybrids would have one of each. So he noticed that if you took tall plants times short plants, all of them were hybrid genetically, even though they all appeared to be tall as they're going. The timeline, you guys are working on that already. I'm going to stop there. Okay. That is going to be the end of part 1. Good luck.